Hello, everyone. Welcome to our video here. Our objective is that students will be able to convert linear stories to equations. That is standard REI.3. Before we dive in fully, it's important to know that you should have seen this before. Y equals mx plus b. We're working with linear equations. Linear equations are in straight lines on a graph. When we graph them, they're in a straight line. The most common way that equations we use to graph straight lines is this: slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. And so that's what we'll be working with today. So let's just jump into it. My first question says, Aaliyah has $55 in her bank account. Every week she earns $15. Create an equation that demonstrates the relationship between her total money, $, and the weeks past, W. So we're representing her total money with this variable, $, and we're representing the total weeks past with this variable, W. Well, for simplicity, we know all our equations today are going to be in y equals mx plus b format. So every time I'm going to write that on my paper. And we're going to kind of go through the process here. We need to know what each part of this equation means. This b is the beginning. It's the y-intercept. So how much money does Aaliyah begin with? Well, it tells me in the first sentence. Aaliyah already has $55 in her bank account. So I'm going to start right under the b because it's the beginning. I'm going to write a plus 55 because Aaliyah started with $55. Now this part's a little bit trickier part. Every week she earns $15. So if I said, how much money has Aaliyah earned in 2 weeks, you'd do 15 times 2. If I said, how much money has Aaliyah made in 3 weeks, you'd do 15 times 3. So each time you are multiplying 15 times the amount of weeks. So if I know W stands for the amount of weeks, I could write that as 15 times W, right? But we don't need the multiplication sign here because when we have a variable next to a number or a coefficient, we know that represents multiplication. So I can just write that as 15W. So now 15W plus 55, well, what does that equal? Well, that equals Aaliyah's total money. And we know, based on the equation, to represent her total money with the $sign. And so now I have my full equation here. I have the $sign, which represents her total money. So Aaliyah's total money is equal to 15 times the amount of weeks plus 55. All right, and so we could use this to solve. And in the next lesson, that's what we'll do. I could ask you if Aaliyah's worked or 3 weeks have gone past, how much money does Aaliyah have now? Well, what would you do to solve that? You'd do 15 times 3, because that's the amount of weeks. You'd figure out that she's earned $45. And how much total money does she have? Well, she started with 55, so you'd have to add the 55. This equation is just representing the process you would go through anyway to solve that. And so hopefully that starts to make a little bit of sense. I want you to try this first. You do, if you remember, on the you-dos. You pause, try it on your own, and then I quickly go over it. So go ahead and pause now. Okay, hopefully you are unpausing because you have already solved the equation. Again, I go through the you-dos kind of quickly because they're mostly just meant for you to check your work. First, I'm writing down y equals mx plus b because that's the format I know all of these equations are in. Eventually, you'll have to create equations not knowing the given format by just making sense of the story. All right, and so let's read this story. A tree is 20 feet tall. Every year, the tree grows 2 feet. Create an equation that demonstrates the relationship between the tree's height, h, and the years past, y. Well, first I'm going to say, where do I begin? It tells me that in the first sentence here, a tree is 20 feet tall. That's positive 20. So I'm going to write a positive 20 underneath the b. Every year, the tree grows 2 feet. Again, I'm going through this quickly. So you do. I can represent that as 2y, 2 times the amount of years. If it's 4 years, I would do 2 times 4, but we don't know the amount of years. It's an unknown number, which is a variable, so we use y. Is equal to the tree's height. The variable I haven't used yet is h. And so the tree's height is equal to 2y plus 20. And real quick, to make sense of it, if I said, how tall is the tree after 4 years? You would probably do 2 times 4 to figure out how much it's grown. It's grown 8 feet. Then you'd have to say, well, the tree was already 20 feet tall, so 8 plus 20, and you get 28. This equation is just representing the process that you would do anyway. All right, on to the next one. This may be a little bit of a longer video because there's 3 examples and 3 you-dos. All right, a river is 60 feet deep. During the summer, the river dries up and shrinks by 1 foot per week. Create an equation that demonstrates the relationship between the depth of the river D and the weeks past W. All right, this one is a little bit different, but I'm going to start with y equals mx plus b, because I know all the equations just for today are going to be in that format. A river is 60 feet deep, so it starts at 60 feet. So I'm going to start with a plus 60 as my b. This is where it gets a little bit different, and this is where you have to have strong reading comprehension skills. During the summer, the river dries up and shrinks by 1 foot. I want you to pause for a second or just think. If something is shrinking, how can I show that mathematically? Okay, hopefully you thought that we use negative numbers. When something's going down or decreasing in math, we can use negatives. And so I'm not going to write, and hopefully we can see this, weeks will be represented with a W. I'm going to not just write 1W, but negative 1W, because each week it shrinks by 1 foot. And so this equation represents the depth of the river. The depth of the river, D, is equal to negative 1W plus 60. And let's just make sense of that real quick. Say I told you 10 weeks have gone past. You put in a 10 for W. Negative 1 times 10 is negative 10. Then you'd add 60 because it started off at 60. You'd get 50. And that makes sense. If it goes down a foot per week, it starts off at 60. 10 weeks passed. Well, it's gone down 10 feet. It's at 50. And so this equation makes sense. All right. We're moving on to you do 2. Again, I want you to pause, solve the question on your own, and then unpause when you're ready for me to go over it. Okay. Hopefully you solved it already. I'm writing y equals mx plus b. That's my first step. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because hopefully you already solved it. Jazira has $2,000. She loves to buy shoes. Each pair of shoes she buys costs $100. Create an equation that demonstrates its relationship using the variables $sign and the amount of shoes purchased, S. All right, I'm going to start with Jazira has $2,000. That's where she begins. It's a positive 2,000. And she buys shoes. And think about it, when you buy shoes, you lose money. And so every pair of shoes she buys for $100, she's going to lose $100. How would I show that? She loses $100 per pair of shoes. Well, that's going to be with a negative 100 S. It should not be a $sign here. It should be an S, because every time she buys a pair of shoes, think about what you're multiplying by. If I said she's bought 6 pairs of shoes, you do negative 100 times 6, all right? The $sign does not make sense here. The $sign represents the amount, how much money she has. And so that's what this all equals. All of this equals how much money she buys. If I told you Jazira's bought 0 pairs of shoes, you'd put a 0 here, negative 100 times 0. You'd get 0 plus 2,000. She still has $2,000. If I told you she bought 1 pair of shoes, well, she's bought a pair of shoes. That's 1. And she's lost $100. So 2,000 minus 100, she'd only have $1,900. All right. All right. Quickly, because I know this is a long video at this point, into the last example. Byron starts a business selling hamburgers. His business starts $3,000 in debt. Each hamburger he sells, he profits 50 cents. Create an equation that demonstrates a relationship between the amount of hamburgers sold, H, and Byron's business total profit, P. All right, so I'm going to start by writing y equals mx plus b. And now I'm going to think really carefully about where does he begin here. He starts $3,000 in debt. Think about what debt represents here. Debt means you have negative money. So I'm going to write negative 3,000. Each hamburger he sells, he profits 50 cents. Every hamburger results in 50 cents. Oh my God, I can't underline hamburger here. Every hamburger results in 50 cents. So I can write that as 0.5 H. All of this is equal to his total profit. All of this is equal to his total profit. His profit is equal to 0.5 H minus 3,000. Eventually, I could ask you questions like, how many hamburgers does buyer need to sell to break even. We'll work on that in the next lesson. But for now, we just need to be able to create the equation. All right. Last you do, go ahead and pause, try it on your own, and then I'll go over it. Okay, hopefully you're unpausing because you've finished solving. A group of hikers began a hike at 5,000 feet underground. They increased their elevation by 200 feet per hour. Create an equation that demonstrates this relationship. All right, hopefully first step, you wrote y equals mx plus b. They began 5,000 feet underground. So that hopefully you recognize that as a negative 5,000 since they are underground. They increase their elevation by 200 feet every hour. And I know that I'm using h to represent hours, so that's going to be a positive 200 h because they're increasing. That's a positive 200. And all of this is equal to their elevation. And so this is our final equation. I hope you got that on your own and you understand this lesson. If not, maybe replay it. And I will see you on the next lesson where we start to use these equations to solve real-world problems.